Good evening. This webinar is Grow Your Ayurvedic Business, Week 5, Integral Ayurveda. I'm Jacob Griscom, and this is an Everyday Ayurveda production. As always, let's start by creating a focused space, preparing your environment, and then sharing a meditation. So first off, turn off all distractions that would take you out of being able to be present in the moment. And the big ones, of course, are the cell phone and text messaging, any email, instant messaging on your computer, and create a quiet and focused space for yourself. Go ahead and come into a comfortable seated position. Calm your breath, calm your mind, and come within. In the present moment, allow your mind to follow the flow of the breath so that you can abide as the witness, as the self. You can listen to the sound of the breath with the inhalation, so, and the exhalation, hum. Enjoy the natural pauses of peace and stillness between the breaths. And with each exhalation in particular, relax more and more deeply into yourself. We'll meditate shortly. And as we meditate, feel your body opening. Feel our group. Feel our Ayurvedic community. And allow yourself and your contribution and your energy to be felt. Om Bhur Swaha Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhyo Yo Naha Prachodayat. Om Namaste. We're going to cover a lot of material tonight on the Integral Ayurveda platform. Now, the Integral approach will help you feel clear and confident about how you help your clients by helping you organize your philosophy and your program of care. And without it, you may have the experience of getting lost with clients and feeling confused about what's missing or why they're not getting results or why you're coming up against the same edges over and over and over again. It'll also give you a lot of structure for how you work with your clients in a committed program, and we'll be leading into that content here in the next couple of weeks. The Integral approach includes everything your clients need for long-term sustainable results. If you don't include everything your clients need, of course, they are less likely to get long-term sustainable results. So tonight we're going to cover two main things. First, we're going to have an overview of the elements of Integral Ayurveda. And secondly, we're going to discuss how to use Integral Ayurveda to build your program. And this is really step 2 in the Grow Your Ayurvedic Business system. First, the core assumptions that we're working with. And the first is that our results come from the actions that we take on a regular basis. So if we want new results, we need new actions and new behaviors. This is true for any aspect of life, including health. Our health results come from the current actions that we take. So if we want new results with our health, we need new actions and new behaviors. Of course, our second assumption is that knowing the behaviors is just part of the solution. It's important, and we need to be able to communicate why challenges come into being and why a new solution or new behavior is going to help lead to the solution. But knowing that information alone is not enough to really get the change. To successfully implement new behaviors long term, we need alignment with our inner world, with our culture, which includes all of our relationships, and with our society, which would include our environment, our systems, all of our shared behaviors. Without that alignment, an individual will have an experience of fighting the current. Right? They'll be paddling upstream and having to use willpower, and sooner or later, they will become again like their environment. So if the inner world, if the culture, if the society is out of alignment, long-term success is unlikely. These are the elements that we're going to discuss here tonight within the Integral Ayurveda platform. The most essential is the 4 quadrants, and this is going to be the foundation for building your program, and also very important to understand in terms of your overall theory and philosophy and how you approach your programs with your clients, are what we can call the horizontal aspect of health here, creating balance along the types and the lines. I'm going to detail about what each of those are, as well as the vertical aspect of growth and shift. And the vertical elements that we'll discuss tonight are states, stages, and shadow. So first off, the 4 quadrants. If you look to the upper right here, this can be the foundation for really creating the map for your program. The 4 quadrants are made of, here on the right, the exterior aspects. The exterior is basically everything on the outside, all of the physical matter. On the left-hand side, we have the interior. And the interior is basically everything on the inside, right? The consciousness, the experience. So we end up with the exterior on the right and the interior on the left. On the top, we have the individual aspect. And on the bottom, we have the collective aspect. So in total, we end up with the interior and the exterior of the individual and the collective. So this gives us 4 quadrants. The first here is the it space, the upper right, the exterior of the individual. These are all the behaviors and actions that we'll be looking at, as well as the overall physiology and expression of health or disease in the body. In the upper right, so the upper right is really the it space, and in the upper left, we have the I space, the interior of the individual. This is the experience. This is the consciousness of the individual, their experience of their health, their experience of disease. In the lower left, we have the interior of the collective. This is what we could call the we space. So as with us here tonight, we're all connected through certain cultural identifications. We're all part of the Ayurvedic community in this case. So when there's a we space, there's a resonance between the interiors of individual eyes. People see each other. They can understand each other. So all people obviously do not always understand each other. Those that do share a certain culture, a certain we space. And there are larger and smaller aspects of culture, and this would go all the way down to, for example, a relationship with an intimate partner, with friends. This is basically the we space that's shared. On the lower right, we have the exterior of the collective. This is society. This is the social space. These are environments, systems, schedules, shared behavior, really systems of its So our economic system, our political system, our environmental systems that we're a part of, all of those are relevant. Right now, you're able to hear this webinar and participate through our telecommunication system that forms part of our social reality. So all of these work together. Again, we're going to be looking through the lens of the it, the behaviors that need to change to create the new actions, and then aligning the interior of the individual, that really their inner experience, their inner beliefs and thoughts and feelings and patterns of energy, as well as their cultural space, their groups, their relationships, making sure that those are aligned so that they think and feel the way that they want to think and feel so that they can take the new actions and get these new behaviors. And then the system space, right? How these new behaviors fit into their schedule, the systems of their life, their agreements, and shared behaviors. The next thing for us to discuss are the horizontal balance aspects of health. If you were to imagine a grid with a horizontal axis and a vertical axis, the horizontal basically shows you all of the options, all of these sort of ways of being, and the vertical aspect will describe growth or development within each of those horizontal lines. So for example, we know that a tamasic vata is different than a rajasic vata, is different than a sattvic vata. Types are essentially a subdivision of a particular kind of thing. And in this case, of course, we're talking about people. So a few of our different type aspects that we have here, first and most familiar to us will be Prakriti, right, the Ayurvedic constitution, which is made up of the Pancha Mahabhutas, the 5 elements, and our Tridosha theory. Everybody has a unique combination of these 5 elements and 3 doshas, and this would be their horizontal aspect of health. We want to balance whatever is present there. So there are certain inherent recommendations for Vata or Pitta or Kapha types and so forth. Now another aspect of typing would be the masculine and feminine typologies. And in Ayurveda and Yoga, we use the nadis to really describe the masculine and the feminine currents. We have the Pingala nadi as the masculine current and the Ida nadi as the feminine current. And one form of really growth and development, of course, is balancing those currents within yourself. It is true that the male form tends to be more dominant in masculine energy, and the feminine form tends to be more dominant, or female form tends to be more dominant in feminine energy. But of course, there are always exceptions to the rule. And what you'll notice is that as we create balance within a type, so as a Vata becomes more balanced, as a Pitta becomes more balanced, as a Kapha becomes more balanced, or as a man or a woman begin to balance the masculine and feminine energies and currents within their own being, it contributes to, it relates to the evolution of consciousness, or in other words, vertical growth. So as we know, Ayurveda and Yoga are sister sciences. Ayurveda is very much focused on horizontal balance. Yoga is predominantly focused on vertical growth. So this is the relationship between the two. As we become more balanced, we grow vertically, we evolve. Now I included some other typology systems in here that if you're not familiar with them already, I think that you'll enjoy. And in the homework, I'll be including links to tests that you can take to figure out your own type. The first is the Enneagram system, and the Enneagram is a 9-type personality system that comes out of Sufism, which is the mystical branch of Islam. So there are 9 different types, and they describe really a core fear, a core desire. They help you understand a lot of the defense mechanisms that individuals take on early in life and continue throughout life. And of course, as any type on the Enneagram develops, higher levels of health are expressed, and in the lower developed forms, or more, we could say pathological forms, there are greater psychological challenges. So the Enneagram is a really great typology system and something that you can add into your mix of understanding types. Myers-Briggs is another typology system that you may or may not be familiar with. It's used a lot in the corporate environment for helping to determine strengths and challenges in the work environment. So it's often used, for example, in trying to determine what sort of job or type of job or career would be the best fit for you in terms of your personality. So you can go ahead and check out the Myers-Briggs and see how that lands, and see how that lines up with what you've actually done with your life, where you've worked, where you've been the happiest. See how that fits. That will be another interesting typology system for you to explore. And of course, everything that applies to the individual also applies to the collective. And types apply to cultures and societies. We look at different countries, different backgrounds, even different parts of the country, and even, in fact, different cities or even different parts of a city can all have their own cultural type and their own society, right? Systems that are stronger or weaker. Again, different types of economic systems and models, political systems and models, environmental systems, etc., technology systems. So everything that applies to the individual also applies to the collective, and we have types of culture and types of societies. The next aspect of horizontal balance are lines. And lines, in this sense, really refer to different types of intelligence. Now, these types that I included here are Howard Gardner's 8 multiple intelligences. And these are probably the most well-known form of lines. Another way to look at lines, though, are essentially as many things as there are to do, those are different ways to be smart, right? So you can develop along many, many, many different sort of subtypes of lines. But these 8 are a great representation of some of the main ways to develop intelligence. Now, the reason it's important to know about lines is that we tend to play our strong cards in life, right? So the intelligences that you're strongest in, you'll tend to lead with. And that's all right and fine and to be expected. But the main thing that we want to make sure we don't do is reduce life to the area of intelligence where we're strongest and essentially make that sort of intelligence more important than others. This is something that has happened in our educational system, in that linguistic intelligence or word smarts and logical mathematic intelligence or mathematical intelligence, number and reasoning smart, tend to be what are most focused on in testing and in our elementary and high schools and even in our higher education. And funding continues to be pulled from these other areas of intelligence, from the arts, from physical, sports programs. And we have actually very little training in our formal educational systems directly in the classes around interpersonal intelligence, intrapersonal intelligence, naturalistic intelligence. The music, obviously, funding often gets pulled from those areas. So in our current culture, in our current school systems, typically there's a bit of imbalance in terms of how these different intelligences are weighed. If we look at each of these, again, linguistic, logical, mathematical, spatial intelligence, body kinesthetic intelligence, musical intelligence, interpersonal intelligence, intrapersonal, and naturalist, you can see that along each of those lines, there are developments. And when you get up into the higher levels of development in any of these lines, it tends to be quite phenomenal and really one definition of what we would call spiritual. But the line that relates most to spiritual development would be the intrapersonal intelligence line, the self line, around self-smart. And this is, of course, the line that allows you to expand your sense of self to ultimately include everything. So this is the thing that we talk about most when we're talking about the evolution of consciousness. And at the same time, developing along any of these lines, they don't exist by themselves. Certainly if we look at how these intelligences live in the brain and the nervous system physically, nothing is an island unto itself. As you develop in one area, it often opens up doors and deeper understandings and synergies in other lines of intelligence. So the way that you can use this is to expand in some of your learning, and if you've, by routine, for example, emphasized certain smarts more than others, you can begin to include other intelligences, and that will help in your personal development. It will also help you understand your clients and the different ways that they may learn or integrate information. So in some cases, it may be better to draw pictures and diagrams for people. In others, it's going to be very important to talk. In others, it's going to be important to be able to move and show them through their body how to do things. And in many cases, especially if you look even at our classical Ayurveda, music was used in a lot of ways to integrate information. You certainly want to focus on communication skills and development with interpersonal intelligence. And intrapersonal is really what we consider to be the primordial cause of disease, helping people connect with the deepest aspect of their self, their true nature as spirit. Of course, any time that we can bring in nature, nature is the ultimate guru, the ultimate teacher, and helps us to understand things in a way that go beyond the mind. So these are the lines, different aspects of horizontal balance, and all very valuable areas to explore. Again, the intention isn't that you need to be a super person and be off the charts in all of these areas, but simply to be aware of them and see the opportunities for growth in these different regions. The next aspects here we'll get into vertical growth. And again, this has to do with the different states, stages, and shadow aspects of the different lines and types. The reason that, for example, again, a Vata looks different in a tamasic stage versus a rajasic stage or sattvic stage. So states are the first. States are really the moment-to-moment of consciousness and matter. What's going on right now? You can see states reflected in the current state of balance or imbalance, what we call the kruti in Ayurveda. This also, of course, applies to culture and society. Cultures and societies go through different states. When there's a big event, certainly you look at something just as simple as the stock market, constantly going through different states, and fears and aspirations are moving right alongside that. So there's always a relationship, again, between the interior and the exterior. And these states are general, constantly moving aspects. The deepest state, of course, to be in is one of connection with your true nature as spirit, where you're fully identified as the witness, as the self. When that's not happening, we tend to be identified with different mind states. And when we're having, essentially, we could say, happy, hopeful thoughts, we tend to be generating feelings in emotional states of happiness, of pleasure. And when we're having thoughts that are of lack, of worry, of concern, of grief, of what could be in the past, or worry about the future, we generate states that are of worry and fear and contraction. So there are mind-identified states that shift moment to moment, and there are also deeper states of witnessing, where we can watch all of these other states happening. There's a relationship, of course, between states and stages. And the more that we go into certain states, the more that we tend to anchor them as actual stages. That will be the next part we'll look at here. So the next aspect of vertical growth are indeed the stages. Stages are the current center of gravity of development within a type or a line. So you may, for example, as an individual, you may have times when you're stressed and not doing so well, and other times when you've got some space and you've got more peace. Well, those are, again, shifting states, but you're going to have an overall typical center of gravity. This is where your consciousness tends to go by default, right? So that is what we're looking at here, is what is this basic evolution of your default stage over time. And when we look at this along, for example, the self line, the movement is from egocentric to ethnocentric to world-centric to cosmocentric. Egocentric meaning that you're first and foremost, focused on yourself. Again, just small s, self, and the immediate needs of the ego. As that expands, and again, we see this in the development of children. Children are mainly egocentric. That's their orientation, is through just the self and its immediate needs. As one grows and develops, an ethnocentric stage can develop. An ethnocentric means that not only are you concerned with just now the needs of the individual ego, but also those with whom you have some connection or affinity, family, friends. That circle of care begins to expand. And we watch that happen in children as well over time, hopefully. Ultimately, it can also evolve into world-centric stages. And in world-centric, you start to care not just about those who you immediately know and have an affinity for, but even those that go beyond your frame of reference, your immediate identity, right? So world-centric consciousness begins to open larger stages of consciousness, of care, of inclusion. And finally, cosmocentric would be the ultimate developmental stage here, to include everything in the entire cosmos, right? All of yourself, all of being, all of everything. Along the self line in Ayurveda, we have the Triguna, these three qualities and stages of development. And it's said that there is a default, a basic center of gravity or an anchor for each individual in either tamas, rajas, or sattva. But of course, most individuals have all of these to some degree in their mind. And you can shift these over time. So in the individual where tamas is dominant, we know that the world is very black and white. There's not a capacity for much depth of feeling or depth of thought. Most feelings tend to be projected outwards. And then in rajas, these aspects begin to be incorporated. The individual can see more things about themselves. And again, this is small s self. But they can have a bigger view of their personality. And for that very reason, it can actually also be sometimes more disturbing, more tumultuous. If ignorance is bliss, then awareness can kind of suck at first, especially, or in particular, when the individual is identified with the limited personality, right? All of the things that you start seeing about that personality that may be challenges are very painful. But that needs to happen before sattva can really be anchored. And sattva is, of course, transcendence, where we can identify as truly the self, the witness. We can watch all of the quirkiness of the personality, the transitory nature of the world, and still be anchored in the self. And with that comes deep experiences of peace and joy and transcendence. So we see this basic developmental stage lined up in Ayurveda and Yoga, from tamas to rajas to sattva. And again, as I stated before, states become traits. The states that we tend to create over and over again become more anchored, ultimately as stages. And the fastest way that we know of to develop from tamas to rajas is really identification of these shadow elements. We'll go into that next. And from rajas to sattva, meditation, identifying, spending time actively identifying as the witness, going into connection with the self. So states become traits. States become an anchor stages. We see this relationship also between the concepts of karma and samskara, karma being actions that are taken. And samskara, these trends or grooves that are developed over time. When you take actions over and over again, they become habits. They become grooves that are even said to be able to carry from one lifetime to the next. So karma and samskara are very much about, very similarly tied to these ideas of states and stages. And of course, anything that applies to the individual also applies to collective. So culture and society go through stage developments. If we look at culture, there are three main cultures that we see dominant in the world today. One we could call the conventional or traditional stage of development. And that came about 5,000 years ago when civilizations were starting to form, when various tribes and smaller cultures were being taken over, usually by force and by violence, and were put under common mythologies, right? Common rules of law, common religions, and usually under a very hierarchical structure. So that's what we call the birth of civilizations. So that's about 5,000 years old, but we still see that that is a very dominant culture camp in our society today. Or in our culture today, we have groups that orient very strongly around dogmatic viewpoints, sort of a black and white view of things, a black and white view oftentimes of religion or spirituality or political viewpoints. And you'll notice that the strength in those groups are that they are able to organize very effectively. Again, this is sort of a pre-logical, pre-rational stage of development, but it's important glue that gets built in. It's what really creates the glue of a culture. And people that are really strongly oriented in that stage of development organize quite effectively and can get behind basically the same talking points and viewpoints very quickly. As that continued to develop forward in history, we had the birth of the scientific thought of the Renaissance, really a greater expansion of logical and rational thought. And that wave of culture we can call modern. So we went from traditional, conventional, to modern. And modern included an ability to take on additional viewpoints, still pretty much anchored, though, we would say, in matter, right? It's not really, doesn't really include a lot of value or care for things that go beyond what can be immediately seen and measured, but it does include the logical, rational world that allows a lot to be seen and measured. Allows a lot of different viewpoints now to come into play. As that continued in culture, like in the United States, around, say, the 60s and the 70s, we saw the emergence of another major wave that is often referred to as postmodernism. And with that, there was an expansion again of greater universal thought, universal care. There were greater movements in terms of civil rights. We still see that developing today. Deepening of women's rights, an expansion of the roles of women and men in culture. Certainly the birth of environmentalism, and we could say the rights of other species. That began as a wave of thought that really started to emerge more powerfully then as a group. So we have these three main, you can almost call them sort of culture camps. And you'll notice that they all tend to disagree with each other pretty heavily and tend to look at the others as having some fundamental flaws. So another wave of development that we've been watching emerge that is really much more hopeful and exciting, and is the next stage, is what we could call a holistic or an integral wave of development. And including this map invites you into that space. It allows you to see how multiple viewpoints can be right? And you can also, though, see the hierarchy of how stages develop. Within society, we have stages as well. Any system that we look at evolves over time. Political systems evolve, economic systems evolve, environmental systems evolve, technological systems evolve, and we can mark really clear evolutions in those stages. For example, right now, we could really say that we are in an age of information. Information is kind of the currency of our age. prior to this, we were in more of an age of technology. Prior to that, more of an age of industrialism and machines that gave birth to greater technology and software and such that led into, again, a greater focus on the sharing of information. And we had many stages that came before that, all the way back to probably about 10,000 years ago when we started having an agricultural system, when people started staying in one place and growing food. So we see how these systems evolve over stages over time as well. Finally, the last aspect of vertical growth that I want to cover here with you is shadow. And shadow are really aspects of the self, small s, like personality, that are denied. So these are really the parts of ourselves that dwell in tamas, that we can't see, that we really kind of separate out and draw a line between our persona and then our shadow, what we say, this is me, but that's not me. Any of those areas we then tend to project onto the world and other people. And the way that we know this and discover shadow is through triggers. Triggers would mean any place where we have an emotional charge or a reaction to a person or to a condition, as well as judgments that we place on people and conditions. These help alert us to areas of shadow within ourselves, areas of ourself that we have drawn a line around and said, that's not me, that we've excluded. I've included in here this week a process called the 3-2-1 process that you can use to help clear and integrate areas of shadow. 3-2-1 stands for third person, second person, first person. So it's a basic process of first speaking the trigger or the emotional charge, the judgment out loud, speaking about it, and then secondly, speaking directly to it. So if it were an individual, imagining you're actually speaking to that person. And then in the first person, owning it, speaking it as yourself to actually clear and integrate and see how those aspects live within you. Personality needs to be uncovered before it can be transcended. This is an important point. Meditation, even though it is a very powerful tool, in fact, perhaps the most powerful tool for growth and development, we can't transcend anything that we can't see. And the things that we can't see and that we keep in shadow and keep in tamas will continue to bite us over time, will continue to show up until they are acknowledged and recognized, integrated into the personality, the limited sense of self, and therefore no longer need to be protected so they can be seen, and then ultimately we can transcend it. Of course, shadow applies to culture and society as well, and that everything that a culture oftentimes tends to say that it stands for, right, is basically the aspect of a culture's identity. And everything that it says that it stands against, it often is parts that it doesn't acknowledge how that exists within itself. So you can see this over and over and over again, that any time that a country, for example, or culture or region speaks out actively, oftentimes with anger or with judgment towards another culture, there are parts of itself that it is in fact denying. Society has its own shadow as well. Our systems have their own shadows. Our educational system, for example, its intention is to educate children, help them develop, and yet its shadow side, the part that is not acknowledged, is the very ways that it can sometimes prevent true education from happening, can prevent true knowledge from happening. So again, anything that's not included in self becomes shadow, and we can uncover it by anything that we actively sort of protect against experiencing and project out onto the outside world or onto others. So now we'll enter into the second part of this webinar, which is how to use the Integral Ayurvedic program or Integral Ayurvedic platform to build your program of care. There are three main areas that we'll discuss, and we'll go into each in more detail, but these are the three main steps. First, you're going to create your behavioral theory of change for your niche. And when we're looking at behaviors, we're going to look to the 3 pillars of life from Ayurveda. The 3 pillars of life, of course, are food, sleep, and sex. And just to give an expanded view of each of these, food would be the 5 senses, the intake through the 5 senses and how that intake is digested. Sleep would be the balance between rest and activity, including concentrated activity like exercise. And sex is not just sexual intercourse, but in fact, all of the management and cultivation of all of our vital force, our vital energy. That includes a lot of interior practices, the ability to feel feelings, to allow energy to flow, a lot of inner awareness that goes along with this. The second step is to uncover the biggest leverage areas with your client and start with the biggest. So by biggest leverage areas, we're going to talk about, what are the behaviors that most contribute to the challenges your clients are experiencing, and what are the behaviors that will most contribute to the desired results they want to be experiencing. Step 3, then, is to work with your client to align their inner world, their personal culture, and their society, and their systems and shared behaviors in the environment with these new behaviors and these results that they want to create so they can get long-term sustainable results. So the first step, we'll drill into what it means to create your behavioral theory of change. And one of the homework sheets that I'll be giving you this week is going to be a template that you can actually use with these exact questions to really map out your theory of change. The reason this is going to be so important is that it's going to help you to illuminate your theory and your philosophy. And that's going to be actually very powerful to creating really an expert space for yourself and something that's very inspiring for your clients. Because once we can really accurately see the challenge and how the pieces fit together, as well as the path to the desired results that we want, inspiration naturally occurs. Prana now has a direction to flow, and we can move forward. So the first thing that you want to find out is what are the biggest challenges that your niche is facing? What are the symptoms, what are the conditions, what are the challenges? And as we discussed in your interview process, what are the impacts of those challenges? How do those really affect your clients? How does that affect their life? How does that affect their experience? How does that affect their relationships and what they can do? So what are the challenges? What are the impacts of those challenges? And then third, what behaviors cause those challenges? Right? What behaviors cause those challenges? What are the things that people in your niche market are tending to do, the big ones, that tend to most relate to causing these challenges? And what you want to do is really drill down and understand how and why that is. You want to describe the Ayurvedic theory and philosophy behind that. You want to understand, the theory behind that. If you can draw on statistics, case studies, stories, as much as possible, you want to build a really clear picture. You want to paint the picture, the map of how these behaviors that they're engaging in are leading to these challenges, right? So you want to illuminate that side of the picture. And then you want to do the same for the desired results. Now, first off, what are the desired results? Usually the desired results are the opposite of the challenge. So for example, if somebody's challenge is that they can't sleep and they're waking up at 2 in the morning and they're having these heart palpitations, and the impacts are that they're feeling totally anxious throughout the day and depleted and not present, and it's cycling along itself. Then they get concerned about not being able to sleep the next night, and so on and so forth. Well, the desired result obviously would be the opposite of that they can fall asleep easily and peacefully, that they can sleep well through the night, and that they wake up feeling refreshed, and that they haven't had to use drugs to get there. Right? Refreshed and clear. And then describing, well, what would be the impacts of that? How would that affect their life? What would that do for them? Right? And you'll know a lot of that from your interviews and from your research, but you can continue to fill in that picture really go into your intuitive space, your feeling space, and feel into the challenges and their impacts, feel into the desired results and their impacts. You want to get it in your body. You want to get it viscerally. You want to be touched. You want to be moved. And in fact, when you do this really well, you may even notice, like when you really get into that state where you're resonating with your target market, you will feel authentic care. You may even have tears come to your eyes when you really get at the challenge and the impact that has and the desired result and the impact that would have. And you will want that for your clients, even those that you have not yet met. And finally, on that side of the coin, you want to discuss, well, what are the new behaviors that are going to cause those desired results? What are the new things that that person is going to do? So again, with the sleep challenge, you may discover that one of the biggest things that's causing these chronic sleep challenges, if that was your niche and your area of focus, is that people are skipping or having random meals throughout the day and just having real fast pace and stress, not slowing down to eat their food. And so by the end of the day, they're coming home with all of this extra stress and they're hungry. And so they have their biggest meal of the day, this big, heavy dinner that then sits in their digestive tract. They have a couple of cocktails to try to help settle the nervous system. And then they can't get to sleep, and then their sleep is disturbed. So you would want to explain, why that is. What's the Ayurvedic philosophy behind that? What's the physiology behind that? What are some, if you have some statistics, case studies, stories to back that up? Really paint the picture of the challenge and why that behavior leads to it. And then when you introduce the new behavior, you might say, well, the number one thing that people can do is have a breakfast that's big enough to get them to lunch without snacking, really slow down in the middle of the day and make lunch the biggest meal of the day, and then have a lighter, earlier supper and avoid the alcohol. So it's not heavy. They don't have this big, heavy meal, and they don't have the alcohol crossing over the blood-brain barrier and disturbing their sleep throughout the night. And again, you'd want to get into detail about the Ayurvedic theory and philosophy about that, and how and why that works, the science behind that, the physiology, case studies, stories, etc. So really build a comprehensive map of the challenges and the impacts, and then the results that they want, the impacts, and the behaviors that are connected to each. Again, you'll have that in your homework, and this is the main thing to bring to your group, your mastermind group this week and work on. Now, when we're talking about the biggest leverage areas, as I discussed there in the sleep example, there are going to be a lot of things that you're going to be able to map out that really contribute to the challenges people are experiencing. And there are also going to be a lot of things that contribute to the results. You're going to have this in a general sense for your market, and then from your enrollment process and with your initial, official initial consultation with your clients, you're going to uncover the challenges and desired results and the cost and impacts more specifically for that person. The reason it's important to have both, a general theory and philosophy for your market as well as the specific one, the general one is going to help you in designing your content, your talks, and speaking to that market in a way that has a general resonance and understanding with everyone. And for the individual, it may be exactly the same, but it also may have some variances. And of course, you want to have a lot of room to address the individual's needs. But the idea is basically that you want to discover the biggest contributing behaviors to the challenges, and again, how and why, and then suggest the new behavior that will give the best return on investment. Right? So if we were doing an investment, and taking on a new behavior is an investment, it takes time and focus and energy. So we want to make sure that if somebody's taking on a new behavior, it's going to really, they're going to notice results, they're going to notice changes. So see if you can figure out, well, what would be like 10 things that would be really important to do. And out of those, what might be the top 5? And out of those, what might be the top 3? And out of those, what do you think kind of over and over again is typically going to be the number one most important behavior to change and to implement that will get them results? And describe how and why that is. With Everyday Ayurveda, you may have noticed from my video on my homepage, the way that I tracked Ayurvedic practitioners is basically talking about the number one biggest mistake that most practitioners make in business that, or with their practice that cost them cash and clients and confidence, and then what to do about it. So I've identified in my mind that the number one biggest challenge is that people try to market Ayurveda rather than going after a specific market, a specific niche, and really addressing the needs of that area so that they can plan their success beforehand. And of course, we go into detail about how to do that and why that's so important. And now you are all in the know. So once you've really mapped that out with the individual, you've given them a sense of the behavior, and you've discussed this with them. You say, well, these are the challenges you're experiencing. And let's talk a little bit about these challenges. And here are some of the behaviors that you've got going on right now that I really see contributing to these challenges. And here's why. And out of all of these behaviors that are contributing to these challenges, here's the biggest one. Here's the one that I think is contributing to this the most, and here's how and why. And you could talk about other stories and the theory and philosophy there to anchor that. So then you talk about the desired results that they want. So we know that you want to be experiencing these things instead. And here's the thing that you want the most, and here's what this would mean for you. So there are a lot of things that will help you get there. And out of all of these things that will help you get there, I want to have you start with what I see as being the most important thing. And that the most important thing is this particular behavior, right? And here's why that's such an important behavior. Here's how it's going to help you get this result. So you want to make sure that you deliver the behavior in a really comprehensive way like that you discuss what the person wants, what they don't want, the impact of each, that you talk about the theory and the philosophy around the behavior that's creating the challenge, the behavior that's going to create the new result. You tell them exactly how to do this new behavior, and you really break it down for them. And then you go ahead and get them started. You say, okay, well, what's going to help you put this in place? So that's all just within the it quadrant, right? The exterior of the individual, the behavior. But for them to get long-term sustainable results, we need now alignment of the other quadrants. Otherwise, there are going to be all sorts of things that are going to get in the way of them actually successfully implementing this behavior. So simply providing, simply discussing the behavior, though, in that coordinated, in that organized way, will help to actually shift their inner world, like we were discussing. It will help to illuminate the challenge and illuminate how to get to the result. And that in itself creates some shift in their inner world. But one of the questions I like to ask to really find out, what else is inside that could sabotage their success, sabotage the results, is when you think about implementing this behavior, or even when you think about actually getting this result with your health, do you feel anything other than peace or joy, right? Do you feel anything other than peace or joy? And this is powerful because this right away gets us into the body. And between the body and the mind is easier to lie. The body will typically tell the truth. So we want to find out, is there anything other than peace or joy that you experience when you think about implementing this new behavior or getting this result? And if there is, we want to take them to that area in their body and help them just bring awareness to that area, to be with that feeling, to be with that sensation, to breathe into it, to bring their awareness there, not to judge it, not to make it anything different than it is, but simply to bring their awareness there and to watch it, right, to help them get into the space of the witness. That will be the fastest way to resolve any inner obstacles. And we'll be going into that in more detail also when we talk about your enrollment process, because that will be relevant in the sort of things that can come up when people just even think about investing in a program of care for themselves. So you can also address thoughts, you can address beliefs, you can address anything else that could get in the way, that could sabotage them from the inside, and get resolution there. The second area where we want to check in is in culture, right, the groups and relationships that they're a part of. So the question that we can ask is, when you think about implementing this behavior, or even when you think about actually getting this result, how do you think that will impact your relationships? How do you think that will impact your relationships? Now, there might be some areas where they can acknowledge, well, it'll be really supportive in this area or that area. But there may also be areas when we ask that question that they think it'll actually be a challenge to a relationship. And just as ahamkara exists at the individual level, ahamkara, or the ego identity, also exists at the collective level. And there can be an underlying fear that when one person in a relationship changes, the dynamic changes. And that if the dynamic changes, again, it could mean death to the relationship. So it's an underlying sort of subconscious fear there. And the challenge is that we can actually sabotage our own health to maintain the consistency or the familiarity of a relationship. So by asking this question, we can help uncover any beliefs or stuck areas there, and then kind of take inventory, right? So then we want to check in, well, where do you have relationships or aspects of relationships that could really support this new way of thinking, feeling, behaving that will get you towards this result? And where are the big challenges? Where do those really lie? Where do you maybe need to have a conversation or shift in agreement so that that doesn't remain as a sort of hidden area that keeps you stuck? So this is very real work, and when we go into everything that's needed to get long-term sustainable results, ultimately it can feel like the process is taking longer, but we're actually going much deeper, and it's going to stick and get long-term sustainable results. So the third area where we need to get alignment is with society, right? The person's shared behaviors, their systems, their schedule, the environment. So we can check in there. We can say, we can start with where when they think about implementing this new behavior, getting this new result, where is that going to fit into their schedule, right? Because the schedule, their personal schedule, is really their collection of systems. Do they need to do anything to kind of optimize their environment to make it easier to do this behavior? Is there anything in their environment right now that they're going to be constantly challenged by and fighting, and they're going to, again, be kind of consistently fighting the current, having to sort of paddle upstream, use their willpower against? So for example, if somebody was trying to lose weight and their house was just filled with processed junk food, then they're constantly going to be fighting the food in their house, right? So their environment is not optimized. So we would want to take that out and put in healthy, whole, natural foods that are going to be more in line with the behaviors they want to take and the results they want to get. So when it comes to optimizing the environment, we can either take things out or put things in. And again, we just want to take inventory. We can also use shared behaviors. We can say, well, who else do you kind of engage with this challenge behavior with currently that you might need to shift that around? And is there anyone in your life, it might even be that exact same person, that you could kind of get on board with this new behavior and then help to hold each other accountable in this new space? Is there anybody else that we would also like to work towards these results? One of the great benefits about creating group programs, and this is something we'll talk about when we get into more step 5 closer to the end of the program, is that you can kind of create a little subculture and sub-society and systems for your own clients. You can buddy them up. You can have them work together and support each other. But in the meantime, you can certainly use their family, their friends, making sure that you get alignment in those collective spaces so that it's not just easier for them to get to these results, but ultimately if they do that well, it's inevitable. They're going to move in the directions they want to move. So that is our content for tonight. I know it was a lot, and this is the homework to be focusing on for the week. The first is for fun and for your own personal insight. You can take the types and the lines assessments. I've included links to both an Enneagram assessment as well as a Myers-Briggs assessment. Both of them are pretty quick assessments. They're both free. And you can take those and learn your Enneagram type, your Myers-Briggs type, and that's in, again, the summary report for this week. You'll also be able to pick up the 3-2-1 process for doing shadow work. I'd love you to practice that. Do that with 1 or 2 or 3 situations or people in your life right now where you notice consistent emotional triggers coming up, right? Where you either have a strong judgment or a strong emotional charge around. And try that 3-2-1 process and see how that goes. If you like it, certainly incorporate it into your regular practice. And then any time that a charge comes up, you can have a look and you can say, okay, well, first, speak about it, then speak to it, then speak as it, and watch how quickly that helps you integrate parts of yourself that were currently existing in shadow and showing up again and again as projections onto the outside world. Over time, that will create a great amount of peace and fewer buttons that get pushed. The third thing and the main thing for the focus this week, the main thing to bring to your mastermind group is your behavioral theory of change. And you can use the worksheet that I've put together for you for this week to really map that out. Again, mapping out what are the main challenges that your market faces, what are the impacts of those challenges, what are the main behaviors that contribute to those challenges, and then an explanation of how and why that is. How and why do those behaviors create the challenges that your market faces that has these impacts in their life? And then the second part of that worksheet is to do the same for the desired results. What is the opposite of those challenges? What do people want to be experiencing? What are the impacts that would have on them? Again, getting into it viscerally, really feeling it, really touching into the stories that you've heard, the interviews that you've done, the space that you can feel into. What are the important behaviors that are going to help them get there, and why and how is that? Again, be able to explain really well how these pieces fit together, and also develop some hierarchy to each. Look at the overall behaviors that create the challenges and see if you can come up with, say, the top 3, and then out of those, the number 1 biggest common challenge or biggest behavior that often contributes to that challenge, and see if you can come up with that for the results, the desired results as well. What are the 3 biggest behaviors that will help them get these new desired results, and out of those, what's the biggest one for the most part that you can see over and over again that's typically going to be the thing that will give the person the biggest return on investment. Post a comment on the blog to reinforce your learning and keep the conversation going with our group. And of course, meet with your mastermind group. And this week, the types and the lines thing and the types and the line assessments and your 3-2-1 process, that'll be fun, and you can share very, very quickly or briefly, but don't spend a lot of time in that in your group this week. Really use your group to help you with your behavioral theory of change, to check in with what you've put together so far, see what they know about the subject and the topic, see what their thoughts are, see if it lines up and if it makes sense for your group. Really focus on getting their feedback this week on what you've put together. And next week, we're going to be taking these maps that you've created, your personal really theories and philosophies, as well as you've got them, and start showing you how to turn them into some powerful content that is going to help you build your list of leads and prospective clients, as well as build your local community talks, teleconferences, free webinars. So this is really going into now building your system, right? So we've covered step 1, which is knowing your market. This is step 2 that we're now working on, which is building your program, your theory, your philosophy, your own sort of brand around how you support your niche and you support your clients. And then we're going to start turning that into the actual system that you use for your business. And that's going to be really fun. We're going to go from there into enrollment and then into deeper aspects of your marketing. So have a great week. Go deep. I just want to send you all of my love and support. Support each other. Reach out. Get the support that you need. And we will connect again next week. Until then.